Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can everyone hear me okay? We're all good? Okay, great. Welcome this evening to the Stratford and District Chamber of Commerce Federal Debate. My name is Travis BLUM. I'm the board chair for the Chamber and also a member of the Government and Civic Affairs Committee. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce our candidates. First up, we've got IRMA DEVRIES from the Christian Heritage Party, Roger FUHR of the People's Party of Canada, Jeff KRAUTER from the New Democratic Party, PIRIE Mitchell from the Liberal Party, John Nader from the Conservative Party, and last but not least, we've got COLLAN SIMMONS from the Green Party. Okay. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this evening, who are also moderators. We've got Jeff Orr from Orr Insurance and Investments here. Thanks goes out to Mike Vancia from Vancia Financial Group, and then Gwen Kirkpatrick from the Huron-Perth Association of Realtors. So thank you very much. The Chamber of Commerce has had a presence in this community since 1860, when we were first incorporated. It is our mission to be the prominent business organization and to be the voice of business by championing economic prosperity and an exceptional value of life. In keeping with our history and objective to promote good government and sound legislation at all levels of government, the Chamber is proud to host this all-candidates debate for the federal election being held Monday, October 21st. Our goal this evening is to focus candidates on issues important to the community, inform voters, and promote transparency and accountability among elected officials. We will be taking written questions from the audience this evening, but reserve the right as an organization to review the questions for brevity. If you have a question, please see one of our runners, myself, June, or Dana up top there, and they will collect your question for you. Okay, please remember though, if we run out of time to ask your question, the candidates will be available for one-on-one discussion after the debate. We would like to welcome Wightman's this evening. They are recording the forum to be broadcast this week. As soon as we know the date and times, they will be posted on the Chamber website and our Facebook page. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Eddie Matthews, the General Manager for the Chamber, who will be our moderator for this evening. Eddie is a well-known and trusted voice in our local community. And yes, in case you're wondering, we did coordinate our outfits here this evening. We are confident in his ability to once again moderate the debate in a way that is fair and respectful to all candidates. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Eddie Matthews.
Thank you. I do feel a little bit strange because we don't have 5 moderators up here. However, if you like, Gwen, Jeff, and I can do the moderating for you tonight, but I'll let them handle the questions. You can hear me okay? I know Travis is just going to give Irma a microphone and then he'll adjust the volume. There's still a little bit of feedback going on this evening. Thank you for being here tonight. It's an important night. It's leading up to an important election, October 21st. We do have runners on the floor, so please ask some questions. Inform yourself tonight. We're going to be covering a number of topics, such as taxation, healthcare, owning a home, employment. On top of that, we'll have your questions as well. As mentioned, we do have runners on the floor. And Travis, if you're just getting up there, you can adjust the volume so we don't have too much feedback here. Just for time's sake, we will try to edit those questions down. And while we're at it right now, check your cell phones. Make sure the cell phones are off. That way we're good to go for this evening. Okay, thank you. We're going to start with some background on our candidates, and we'll give each candidate some time to tell you a little bit about themselves, and we'll go in alphabetical order. Irma DeVries, you get to start things off, and you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. For 40 years, I've lived and worked on a farm near Harriston. My husband and I milked cows, grow crops, buy and sell used grain bins, and we create electricity from water power. We raised 4 children and we have 11 grandchildren. Life is just great, except for the increasing bureaucracy imposed upon our businesses and our properties. As a woman who loves to read, I started researching legislation, court cases, and learning about contracts. Commerce and government is all about contracts. Every 4 years, we contract for the person who will represent us in Parliament. Will they, or will they represent the party? Life is all about contracts. Disrespecting their inalienable right to life, the abortion industry contracts for profit, kills not yet born children, and sells their body parts. The euthanasia industry contracts to murder the mentally ill, the disabled, or the elderly. The climate change industry contracts for their profit, smart meters, 5G, and a carbon tax. You pay. I'm offering to contract with you. I will represent life from conception to natural death. I will strengthen the traditional family unit and promote freedom of speech, conscience, religion, and property rights. What is in the contract these men are offering? Do you have full disclosure? A meeting of the minds? Let's open the contract and see what's in it.
Thank you, Irma. Roger FUHR, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Eddie, and thanks to the Chambers for hosting this event. And it's great to see everybody here tonight. The light is green. The light is green.
Grab Irma's mic then. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, is that better? Yes, okay. I'm a local fella, been here in Perth County all my life, was raised on a dairy farm close to Stratford here, and I ended up running a tool and die company here in Stratford, so I was a successful entrepreneur, and I'm now retired from that, and apparently I'm dabbling a little bit in politics. Anyways, our party was formed about a year ago, and we have based it on 4 principles, being freedom, respect, fairness, and personal responsibility. We proceeded to develop our platform based on our principles and extensive polling on the various planks in our platform of Canadians nationwide, with the goal being to provide a platform that will put Canadians first, not other people. Canadians must come first. We know that we can't please everybody, nor will we try to, because when you take that approach, you end up not pleasing anybody. We simply ask that you investigate our platform, and if you cannot support it, that's okay. We're doing politics differently, and we thank you for reading and considering our policies. We want to have discussions with Canadians on a wide range of topics, including some things that other parties do not want to talk about. We want to have a smaller government in Ottawa that will respect the taxpayers and the Constitution. We have substantially different policies from all of the other parties on these subjects. Health care, balancing the budget, immigration, interprovincial barriers, defunding the CBC, and that's just to name a few. Here are measures that we will take to save tax dollars. We're going to end corporate welfare, and that alone will save billions of dollars each year. We will substantially lower the total number of immigrants to sustainable levels of between 100 to 150,000, down from the other party's goal of 350,000, which will be sustainable and will save an estimated $27 billion per year. We will stop sending billions of dollars to developing countries to help them reduce their CO2 emissions. We will balance the budget in 2 years, unlike other parties who pledge.
Your 2 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Jeff KRAUTER from the New Democratic Party. 2 minutes.
Good evening.
We seem to have, Travis?
Good evening. Careful what
There
you
we go.
wish
I think
for.
that works.
Good evening. I'm Jeff KRAUTER. I've worked in radio and on various community boards, and I'm a person living with cerebral palsy. I know what it is to confront inequality, and I know what it is to succeed. I'm running in this election for real and measurable climate action, to protect and expand our universal health care, and to fight for people in this community who are struggling with the cost of living. Small and medium-sized businesses drive our economy, and small business owners, like many Canadians, are struggling to get by. The other parties are full of helpful rhetoric, especially around election time, but they continue to give more and bigger breaks to the people and the corporations who need it the least. The NDP is ready to make the investments Canada needs now so that we can have a livable and a prosperous future. While startups in our community are innovating in clean energy, we should not be locked into fossil fuel infrastructure for years to come. While young people are increasingly finding it hard to find a place to live, we should not be shrinking federal investment in affordable housing. And while more and more people are falling through the cracks in our healthcare system, we should not be taking direction from big pharma and multinational insurance companies. We need climate action that doesn't leave workers and families behind.
30 seconds.
If you want a different outcome, make a better choice. Choose the NDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Perry Mitchell, check that microphone first for us to make sure that it works, okay?
Hello?
I think that works.
I think so.
There we go. Perry, you've got 2 minutes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is PIRIE Mitchell, and I'm your Liberal candidate in this federal election. I was born in Montreal and came here 50 years ago, settled in the Kintore area and the St. Mary's and Granton and these other places around us. And for the past 10 plus years, I have lived in St. Mary's. My working life has been spent in service to others, as an educator, as a clergy person, and as a counselor. I'm 78 years old and nicely broke in, and I think I'm ready to do the job in Ottawa. Now, for those of you who know me, I reflect the general ideals of the Liberal Party. We care about our neighbor, we care about the state of our world's climate, and we care about the people who occupy the middle and lower end of the economic scale. There needs to be a balance of our economic goals and the fighting of climate change that we face today. In my personal and professional life, I clearly see the difference between what I owe people that I serve and the vested interests of those who would like something else. I've never invested myself in the public good for personal profit other than a salary. I don't believe in gotcha politics or trashing people or who have different views than mine. I believe in working together and knowing from experience that collective wisdom and collective energy always make a difference. If I am fortunate enough to be elected as your representative to Ottawa, I will do the job in the manner that I have tried to live my life, with honesty and straightforwardness. If I need to disagree with my party on a particular issue, I will do so. And since the riding was created in 2003, it has always gone conservative under Schillenberger and Nader. It's now time to elect a member from the ruling party in Ottawa.
Thank you,
Thank
Barry.
you.
John, check your microphone, just make sure it works.
Test, test.
There we go. John Nader, you've got 2 minutes.
Good evening, and first of all, thank you to the Stratford District Chamber of Commerce for hosting tonight's debate. Events like this are so important for us to give the opportunity to speak about our plans and for you to ask us about the issues that matter to you and your families. My name is John Nader, and for the past 4 years, it's been my honor and privilege to serve as your Member of Parliament. I'm standing for re-election as a Conservative candidate because I believe in service. Service means showing up. It means listening to the views and the concerns of you. And it means taking action on the matters that are important to you and your families. About 2 years ago, many in this community were concerned and were angry when they found out that a man who worked with young people and people with disabilities was convicted of a serious crime, and for that crime was sentenced to a monetary fine. I was angry too. But instead of just being angry, I took action. I introduced legislation in the House of Commons that would have better protected young people and persons living with disabilities. Unfortunately, that law was not passed before Parliament was dissolved for this election. But if I'm given the honour of serving a second term as your Member of Parliament, my first action in the House of Commons will be reintroducing that bill. Service also means working hard and advocating for the issues that matter to our communities. Rural infrastructure, broadband, support for families and seniors, and taking action in support of our small businesses. Small businesses represent 70% of the workforce. And unfortunately, too often, others in the industry, others in government, have described small business owners as tax cheats. They're not. They are those that drive our economy, that support our community functions, and that work hard every day. I'm proud of my service to the people who've come into my office, the 1,200 people who've asked for our support and who we've been honored to serve. On October 21st, you have a choice to make. I would be honored if I receive your support. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And finally, Colin, check your mic. Just make sure your mic works.
Hello.
There we go. Colin Simmons, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and thank you for the Chamber for hosting. My name's Colin Simmons, and I'm the Green Party candidate here in Perth-Wellington. I'm new to politics. I'm a doctor. I work at the hospital here in Stratford and occasionally up in Clinton. That's for you, Andrew. And the reason why I got into politics is about a year ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the report. That report they released said that we have about until 2030 to reduce our emissions by about 50% globally in order to keep climate change limited to under 2 degrees average change. Now, I'm an anesthesiologist, and that means in my job I deal with sick, complex patients for complex surgeries, and part of my job is assessing that risk. I look at the patient, I look at their numbers, I look at what's going to have to happen to them. So when I looked at the numbers for climate change in this report, the risks are high. We're in trouble, and I don't know if we're going to pull through. So I had a choice, and I wanted to make the choice to get involved and make change. And we need a new voice representing Perth-Wellington in Ottawa, because the partisan bickering, specifically over climate change, has been going on for 30 years. Climate change is not a new problem, and for those of us that are saying we need more time or we need to be gradual, that time was in the 90s. We're now in 2019, and we're running out of time. We also need a voice that respects the science and is free of corporate influence. And I don't want to get cut off, but I'm going to leave you with this. If you can trust me with your life for an anesthetic, you can trust me with your vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Colin, we're going to start with you for our first question this evening, and then it'll be followed, we'll give it to John after that, and then open up for debate with the rest. Transportation and employment issues have gone hand in hand in this area. We have lots of jobs that require workers, but many can't get here due to the lack of transportation. How would your government help in this area, Colin?
Transportation and employment are incredibly important. Perth-Wellington has problems with both. So transportation, we want to increase funding to the municipalities by doubling the current funding from the gas tax. That will provide stable funding for the municipalities to invest in public transit. And we want to go for clean and efficient electric public transit. We also want to do inter-town and inter-city transit, so it's not just subways for Toronto. We want to connect all of Canada, so it's easier to use transit than it is to be in your car. We also want to invest in rail. For employment, a lot of the employment issues are related to availability of workers. They don't have places to live that are affordable, so we want to invest specifically in rental housing with tax incentives for the builders, and we want to provide the municipalities stable funding through access through the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. John Nader, you've got 1 minute, and then we'll give everyone else a minute to respond as well.
So often people think of a low unemployment rate as a good thing, and generally a low unemployment rate is a good thing. But the challenge is when you can't find people to fill the jobs, it's a real detriment to local businesses. I know of far too many businesses, processing companies, factories, small businesses who simply can't find workers. You hear of stories of busing people in from Mississauga, from Brampton, And that's a short-term stopgap solution. It's not sustainable in the long term. In terms of transportation, the challenge is we need to be partnering with our municipalities. The County of Perth is developing what's tentatively called Perth Rides. I think that's a great opportunity. Currently, the federal government is not a partner in that. The province is, the federal government is not. I think the federal government should be partnering on that program. Further, in terms of employment more generally, housing is a major issue. When you don't have attainable housing, you can't find people to fill these jobs. A third issue is the immigration system. The temporary foreign worker program has major challenges, particularly when you're trying to bring in new Canadians to fill some of these job vacancies. It's a temporary program, but it's a long-term problem.
Let's open up to everybody else, and we'll open up for debate. Irma, did you want to respond to any of that?
CHP Canada would restrict international investors from purchasing homes and land in Canada. This will help control the cost of housing and make more housing units available to those within our own country that need them. We don't support them sitting empty. We support rezoning to allow grandpa suites and renovate houses so that they can be used for more units, because higher density is much better when it's close to the jobs and the employment opportunities. We also would like to talk about our infrastructure loans. We would give municipalities money from the Bank of Canada at zero or low interest so that they can build the infrastructure within their own communities that they know is best for their community. And that, again, is our promise of infrastructure loans for rebuilding.
Okay, thanks, Irma. Roger, respond to that as well, too. You've got a minute to respond to that.
I see that the lack of investment in transportation is one of the key problems. And when you're constantly running deficits in Ottawa, it's difficult to invest. And our party plans to put Canadians first, and we understand how important transportation is to our economy. And so a People's Party of Canada government will immediately begin to invest into transportation services such as VIA, such as other local transportation methods, because we are going to be, with some of our new policies, we're going to be able to come up with funds that we can invest into these projects with. And on employment, immigration is a key issue right now. And right now we're not getting enough economic immigrants into our country, people who can actually fulfill employers' needs. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff KRAUTER, what would you do with when it comes to transportation and jobs in this area?
So that's a major stumbling block in terms of the labor shortage that's been identified, and it's also a root cause of social isolation and economic stagnation in our region. The NDP has made it a priority as part of our climate plan and as part of our broader platform to be a reliable partner to invest in modern zero emission and low cost, eventually fare-free public transit, connecting cities all over the region. Another affordable housing. We want to build 500,000 affordable units in an eight-year time span, and another. And also family doctors. We need priority on getting family doctors to communities where they're most needed.
Thank you, Jeff. And PIRIE Mitchell, respond to that one, please.
The transportation thing is, we've come a long way in Perth-Wellington, and we have a grant coming from the provincial government, and that is going to help us with that. We've been meeting with the Via Rail people about improving transportation to Toronto and to London, which will help. But really our big problem right now is getting enough people here. The Minister of Immigration came and paid us a visit 2 days ago and talked about the new initiatives. For example, we're really short of people for farm labor in this riding. And he now has a plan, and it's now ready to be implemented, and we can do it right now, that if we have a man or a woman here who are doing seasonal labor work in one of the greenhouses, that person can start working on a farm. He'll be on a fast track, or she'll be on a fast track for citizenship, and they can bring their family with them.
Thank you, Perry. Question number 2, before we start taking some questions from the floor, and thank you for giving us your questions. This one will start with IRMA, Roger to follow, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the candidates. And kind of staying with employment. With 1 in 7 jobs related to the auto industry, what would your party do to reinvigorate the auto industry, especially when it comes to manufacturing and suppliers, especially in this area? Irma, we'll start with you, and you've got 1 minute.
We support infrastructure loans, and I've talked to you about that already, so I won't go over it too much. We also think that government needs to get out of the red tape. And there's so much red tape when it comes to the auto industry or any other industry, farming industry, small abattoirs, rules and regulations, and that is a real detriment to the economy because the owners are spending a lot of time with compliance costs. What we would do would implement something called a fair tax, and a fair tax would be no income taxes at all, and we would implement a national sales tax that would be about 20%, but you would be far better off, and that would benefit and create an economic boom in our country. Between the infrastructure loans and no income tax, we would really have a boom in our culture.
Irma, thanks. Roger, follow up on that, please.
Thank you. So our key component of this issue is that we're going to be lowering the corporate income tax rate from 15% down to 10%. And we're the only party that has this as one of our policies. And this is very key because that's going to allow the corporations to invest more money, especially here locally, and that's how we plan to reinvigorate this sector.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the other end. Colin?
To answer the question, the auto industry has failed to adapt, and that's part of the reason why sales are sluggish and they're having problems. The Green Party wants to mandate 100% of new vehicles be electric by 2030. And so this is a giant market, and this is a place where the auto industry can expand to. There's GM plants in Canada that are shuttering, which would be a perfect place for an electric car manufacturer like Tesla to come into and just rework their machines and start producing electric cars. They have a skilled workforce, and there's talk of that. They started their factory in California, which was a failed plant between, I believe, it was a shared plant between GM and Toyota. And they came in and reinvigorated that industry, and they're Ford and them are the only 2 that haven't gone bankrupt since they declined. So they're doing pretty well.
Good. John?
When I meet with local manufacturers, they usually highlight a number of issues. But one of the things that, one of the key things they always mention is that they're not only competing against other businesses, they're often competing against themselves as well because they have plants in other countries. And so the focus they need to see is where they can make something the cheapest. But at the same time, one of the great values we have in Canada is our skilled labor force. And so the focus on quality over potentially the cost or the quantity is something that can drive our local economy. Specifically here in Stratford, a number of our local manufacturers were very hard hit by by the steel and the aluminum tariffs that we saw over the last couple of years. That's a huge impediment to our businesses competing internationally. Both the tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs hurt our local manufacturers because they're hit both exporting and importing, whether it's raw products or finished products. So having a sustainable, long-term trade relationship with our trading partners is exceptionally important. Finally, the cost of doing business.
We'll hold you on that one, John, and we want to get everybody in on this one tonight. We've still got PIRIE and Jeff to go to. PIRIE?
The business of car manufacturing in Canada is a tough one because in the world at large, we're competing with other nations which have cheaper labor. What will save us is the new cars coming on stream, the electric cars that require a well-educated labor force, and that will help us hugely down the road. It's very difficult to legislate the businesses with car manufacturing when other places in the world can make rules that short-circuit that. This is one of those free trade problems that we have everywhere. But I think the electric car will really help us in that regard.
Thank you, Perry. Jeff, let's end up with you and talk about the auto industry in this area.
So the NDP's plan, principal plan to fight climate change is to create 300,000 good family-sustaining jobs in the clean energy sector. And I know how much this community suffered when Fram closed, for instance. This area, Stratford, St. Mary's, and surrounding area, is positioned to be a powerhouse in the building and maintenance of electric vehicles. We're going to develop an industrial strategy to put more zero-emission vehicles on the road. It's one thing to say, well, we can legislate or we can give a tax credit. No, we have an industrial strategy to put people to work in the manufacture of zero-emission vehicles right here in Canada to employ our skilled workforce.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks to everybody on that one. We're going to go to the third debate question. This one we'll address to John Nader. Perry Mitchell, you can respond to this one after John's done. The federal deficit keeps getting bigger. Everybody wants something, whether it be an increase to old age security, dental coverage, post-secondary education, paid for affordable housing. What's the key issue that you can see that needs to be addressed and needs to be funded?
The thing I hear at the doorsteps is affordability. When I talk to people, they're working hard, they're following the rules, but there's not a lot left at the end of the month. They're getting by, but they're not getting ahead. So I hear that time and time again. The deficit's an issue. The deficit is a major issue. You can't invest in the needs of the Canadian citizens if you don't have your own financial house in order. Currently, projections show that we may not balance the budget on the current trajectory until 2044. My 5-year-old daughter will be 30 years old by then. That's not fair to her generation to be saddled with the debt of our generation. One of the things we need to look at is a long-term strategy in terms of reducing the debt within the short term so that we can invest in the needs of Canadians. One thing we'll do about affordability is make sure we have more money in people's pockets so they can reinvest in their families, save for a rainy day, put some money away for retirement, or save for that children's education. That's what's important for us, and that's what we want to see happen for the families of this community, both those who are raising young children, but also those caring for aging loved ones as well.
Barry?
Well, John, they were good words that you use, but your party hasn't proven that in the 8 years they were in power before the Liberals took power, that the deficit climbed when they were there, and the Conservatives are supposed to be the party of fiscal restraint, and it hasn't proven it to be that way. What we need to remember is that the deficit that we have in this country is the lowest deficit when compared to the gross domestic product of any country, any G7 country. That of all the folks that belong to our economic partnership, we have the lowest. And it got paid down last year. Not a lot, but it got paid down some last year. The point is, if you think that austerity is going to, is the way we need to go right now, we better not. We better be careful, because the moment you do a big austerity program is the moment that you run into trouble in terms of employment and profit in Canada.
Okay, thanks, Perry. Jeff, what's your position?
Well, unfortunately, both the Liberals and Conservatives are running on disguised austerity. We give over $103 billion in tax giveaways to the largest corporations. And when we talk about debt and deficit, we're really talking about choices and priorities. What the NDP would choose to close those tax loopholes that are allowing money to be hidden offshore. We would fight against the Conservative plans to make it easier to have tax shelters at home. And we would have a super wealth tax on wealth above $20 million, which would generate billions of dollars for future generations' social programs.
Jeff, we're going to come back to that, because after everybody's done, then we will open it up for a 3-minute debate amongst everybody and try to keep the sound bites for about 30 seconds or so. Roger, let's hear your side of things right now.
I have to tell you guys, one of the main reasons I'm up here is because of my grandkids and your grandkids and everybody's grandkids. I am extremely concerned about future generations, and it just makes me feel ill that I'm going to lay the burden of debt on them. They have not done anything to deserve this debt, and they should not have to bear the burden of this debt. And so that's why I'm really excited to stand up here on behalf of the People's Party of Canada and tell you that we are going to balance the budget in 2 years. Yes, we can do it. You have to take a look at our policies and study it, though. But it is possible, and we are not talking about austerity measures. And this must be done. I'm very passionate about this subject, and we need to get to a balanced budget and then start to pay down the debt. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Irma?
Since Pierre Elliott Trudeau took Canada off the gold standard, debt and deficits have ballooned immensely. The debt of our nation and the way previous governments freely hand out money around the world is a harm and a trespass against all our men and women, present and future, who live in Canada. It's a crying shame the way previous governments have mortgaged future generations so that we can live the way we wish to today. The CHP would treat the debt like a mortgage and begin to pay down that debt. We would require balanced budgets. We would not add to the mortgage. We would cut a whole lot of unnecessary grants to special interest groups, unnecessary surgeries. We'd defund the CBC, and we would not run a deficit at all. And therefore, we would hopefully, over the little time, we would begin to control this destruction of our nation.
Thanks, Irma. Colin, last but not least.
There's only been two parties ever in control of the federal government. That's the Liberals and Conservatives. And what we need to do is stop prioritizing the corporations and the wealthy and instead close the loopholes like stock options, dividend exemptions, and offshore tax evasion, as well as tax large corporations appropriately. The Canadian banks made $40 billion in profit last year. Multinationals like Facebook, Google, Netflix pay almost no tax in this country. We need to change that. And we can't balance the budget on the backs of the poorest people who use the services. We should be going after the wealthy. There hasn't been a tax commission in this country since the 1960s, and in the Green Party platform, we're requesting one so that we can make our tax system much more fair and stop the wealth gap between the poorest in our country and the wealthiest. Okay. Thank you.
Let's open it up for debate here. We hear all the promises, but is there something in reality that we should be addressing? John, you had your hand up first.
I actually agree with something Dr. Simmons said, and that's about there hasn't been a tax commission in Canada since the 1960s. I think that's honestly a very important idea. We need to have a full and comprehensive review of our tax system in Canada. It hasn't been done for decades. It has to be done. I want to make a quick point as well about the debt to GDP ratio. That's a lovely figure. But in dollars and cents, by 2022, we will be paying $35 billion a year in interest alone. That's $35 billion that's not being invested in the programs and the services that matter to Canadians.
And Irma, you wanted to follow up on that.
I hear a lot of tax the wealthy, tax the wealthy. Did they not earn their money through hard work and seeing an opportunity? Robin Hood and his merry men are here today. Our fair tax would have the people buying a new vehicle paying a higher tax, and people buying a used vehicle would not pay any tax at all. So if you want to take from the rich, then our fair tax policy would be much more equitable.
Okay. Anybody else want to follow up on that one? Colin, then we'll go to PIRIE.
First of all, I want to say that all this talk about the debt and deficit is important, but the debt we're leaving to our children for climate change is much more important. The debt isn't actually going to kill our children. It's not somewhere in a room, it's not going to fall over on them. Climate change is much more important, and we should be focusing on investing on things that are actually going to change that, because that is a quantifiable risk. When they say it is an existential threat, they're not talking about French literature. They're talking about it is threatening our existence. And that's something we need to take care of rather than worrying about our debt to GDP ratio.
Okay. Terry Mitchell, you wanted to follow up on that.
Well, I thought they were applauding for me that I was speaking next, but they're obviously not. Let me just suggest to you that my colleague here in the Conservative Party had a leader in the last, when they were last in office, and he promised that he would balance the budget at the end of his term. Do you remember that promise? And what he did is he went into every department and stripped it of all the money that hadn't been spent in the budget, including the money that was set aside for the veterans. And as a chaplain for the Legion, my job was to help veterans get their benefits. And for 8 months, we had men and women who needed wheelchairs, who needed various pieces of equipment, men and women from the Second World War who couldn't get it. It's a wonderful thing to be austerity and to say we're going to balance the budget and that. But in actuality, when the Conservatives try and do that, they have to take nefarious ways to do it.
Good. Thank you, Perry. We've got 15 seconds, so let's hold off on that unless you can make it really quick. Make it real quick, John.
It's a little rich when just yesterday we found out that the Government of Canada and the Liberal Party was defunding or reducing funding for veterans' medical services.
Okay, we'll hold it at that. Okay. Next question is, we'll throw it at Perry and Jeff to respond, and then we'll open it up for a 3-minute debate after we go through all the other candidates. What would your party do? Perry, what would your party do to make business more competitive in the global community? We have some world-class companies here in Stratford. There always seems to be some red tape or some hurdles that seems to stifle that creative juice that comes from Canadians with great business ideas. One example that people talk about is the Government of Canada's unfriendly websites, which are extremely hard to navigate and making it difficult for small business owners to access the information they need, or many forms and different departments to deal with. How would your party help with that?
It's me you want to ask it, okay?
Yep.
The Liberal Party have in place agencies that help sell our products overseas, and they're very successful at doing it. Now, after having said that, we are also have problems with countries like China, who, because China has a very different view of things, and they're very strong on the markets, have been able to close down the market on canola and on hogs because of a dispute between the United States, Canada, and China. That's a problem that has to be addressed and has to be taken care of. Now, you can go and punch China in the nose and strip them and take everything away that we've done with them, but that's not going to work. China is a unique country that requires unique handling. Krista Freeland, who is our international negotiator, is hated by Donald Trump, which means she must be doing a good job. And she...
Barry, we'll hold you at that. Always leave them with some applause, right? Jeff KRAUTER, you can respond to this, please.
So our competitiveness of our businesses abroad is a priority also for the NDP. The fact is that the changes that the Liberals have made to Investment Canada have not been working. They have not delivered the results that a lot of entrepreneurs were expecting. So what we're proposing is that we're going to scale up, particularly tech investments, so that it's easier for those companies to access funds. And as I want to go back to our electric car strategy and zero emission vehicles, those are just a couple of the green technologies that we could be exporting abroad.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. Roger, we'll throw it at you about keeping us competitive.
International trade is, of course, extremely important, but it's kind of hard to get really into the meat and potatoes of that if you haven't straightened out your own backyard yet. I'd like to spend a couple seconds talking about our internal trade policies. More than a century and a half after Canada's founding, Canadians still cannot buy, sell, or work freely within their own country. Goods such as alcohol and agricultural products cannot be sold freely across provincial borders, and this is not what the Fathers of Confederation had intended. The Constitution states that goods must be admitted free into each of the other provinces. So this is a very serious problem. And the People's Party of Government is going to ensure that the Constitution of Canada is upheld and that goods and services can move freely between provinces and people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Irma?
The Christian Heritage Party supports the concept of free markets and free trade, and yet we really know that we have to balance these ideals against and protect our manufacturers and our farmers from market forces and that foreign competition that could drive them out of business. We think that we need to have a bold negotiator at the table. We need to look at other markets other than China. We need to send that Chinese executive back to China and claim back our 2 citizens that are in jail there. We should not be held hostage because of the USA. It's detrimentally affecting our economy. Remember, the government has no money. They only have the money that they take from your back pocket. And we know that socialism will someday run out of other people's money.
Thanks, Irma. Let's go over to Colin for this one.
To make Canadian businesses competitive worldwide, we need to invest in Canadian businesses and have a longer lens on what's going to happen to the economy. Climate change is going to affect the economy, and we should be ahead of it. We should help our businesses develop the green technology that the world is going to need in order to replace fossil fuels and invest in their transportation infrastructure. What we should do is invest in our universities, which we plan to do, invest in our students by abolishing tuition, and then investing in our businesses so that there's an advantage given to them if they go into a green and clean technology development. That would give us a huge advantage. The world is going to be converting to a fossil-free lifestyle, and if we're the country that knows that, we'll lead the way.
Okay. John?
So first of all, I want to address the China issue very briefly. We have 2 Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spaver, who are being held illegally in China without proper access to consular services. And yet we are giving China, through the Asia Infrastructure Bank, $250 million to build infrastructure in Asia controlled by China. We should be canceling that funding immediately. We should also be taking China to the WTO and looking at targeted import tariffs or sanctions against China on imports to Canada. It's the least we can do for 2 Canadian citizens who are being held illegally in China. On small businesses, we need to promote our small businesses. Under a Conservative government, we'll look at smart regulations to reduce regulations for small businesses. I was speaking with a small business owner yesterday in Harriston. He didn't qualify for a program run by the current federal government because he was too small of a small business. It's ridiculous. You talk to small business owners who are constantly spending more time doing red tape and regulatory reporting than actually running their business. That needs to change.
Okay. Let's put 3 minutes on the clock and let's open it up for debate. If you were elected, Jeff, I know you've got your mic up right now. What would the NDP do to make us a bit more competitive?
Well, I wanted to speak to the broader issue of trade. Now, you know, both the Liberals and the Conservatives in government, you know, when they enter into these deals, they claim to have Canada's best interests at heart. Well, as we saw in the NAFTA negotiations, part of the Liberals' negotiating position, and it was one that was entrenched by Stephen Harper, was to allow for investor state provisions that would have allowed and did allow Canada to be sued for billions of dollars under these provisions by foreign corporations. We're against investor state provisions. They're not only hamstringing government policy at home, but businesses, you know, businesses abroad who you know, run into situations where the governments we're trading with are not abiding by these provisions anyway. These are rules that are written for the largest investors and finance capital, and they need to be abolished in all trade agreements.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to say about this? If not, we'll go to Irma.
We think that we should reduce the trade barriers and keep them as low as possible. However, when certain countries have a low standard of human rights and are able to provide goods and services at a cost that our Canadian companies cannot compete with, then we need to have our government level the playing field through tariffs. So we would use tariffs judicially because we don't want to get into a trade war, but we want to protect our Canadian producers and manufacturers from that unfair competition.
Okay. Anybody else? No? PIRIE, before we close things off?
Well, it's very difficult with trade because there are countries who subsidize their folks. For example, in the United States, farmers, dairy farmers, get an enormous subsidy from Washington. It's one of the reasons we have supply management in this country is to try and counteract that subsidy that goes to them. In New York State, if you have the dairy farmers, 73% of their paycheck comes from subsidies. And if they took away the subsidy and took away the labor, there'd be 1,100 farms go to business. So the point is that every country treats things differently. The United States, Britain, China, or not China, France, Europe have huge subsidies on agriculture, which makes it difficult for us to compete.
Okay. Thanks, PIRIE. We're going to take some questions from the floors, and I'll open this up to anybody that wants to jump in on this one, because it's one that has been a big issue, probably number one when you look at all the debates that have been taking place. The environment should be our primary concern. How would your party deal with the looming threat of climate change? Anybody want to take a stab at that, Colin?
I'll go first. So the Green Party, our central plank of our platform is climate change, and we consider it the most important thing. We also do want to take care of our population as well, because what's the point of saving the environment if you're not saving the people too? So first of all, we want to declare a climate emergency. We want to remove partisan politics out of it by making it inter-cabinet so that any legislation passed would be multi-partisan, so it wouldn't get caught up by bickering. We want to remove all subsidies from the oil and gas industry. We want to cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline. We want to ban fracking immediately. We want all cars to be new cars by 2030 to be electric. We want to invest in public transportation, including rail. And we want to work with industry to develop green technologies. All the technology we need to fight climate change is available. It's just, the future is already here. It's just unequally distributed. We need to make sure it's better distributed.
Thanks,
Thank
Colin.
you.
John, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. The Conservative Party has put forward a real plan for the environment which focuses on 3 key points. The first point is action here at home, here in Canada. And that would require major emitters to reduce their CO2 emissions, or if they fail to do so, to reinvest in their businesses in green technology to further reduce their emissions. Second is working with key stakeholders and protecting our natural environment, lakes, rivers, and streams, stopping the dumping of raw sewage into waterways, and working with groups such as our agriculture community on best practices that they're already undertaking to protect our environment. Third is that we must and we should be doing more here at home, but we also need to take action on the world stage as well. We need to make sure that our Canadian technology is being used internationally to reduce emissions in places like China, India, Indonesia, and other places as well, where places like China, for example, are building 300 new coal-fired power plants. We can use Canadian technology internationally to help reduce emissions as well.
Okay, thanks. Roger, you wanted to say something.
Due to the fact that there is no scientific consensus that our carbon-based economy is accelerating climate change, and that plants require carbon to exist, we do not plan to acquire your tax dollars to change our prosperous Canadian society. Having said that, we do firmly believe in a cleaner environment, and all of us need to participate immediately in working toward that goal. Personally, I installed a small wind generator and solar array in 2004, which has been providing all of our electricity since that time. I have also planted thousands of trees on our farm. What will you do? What will you give up? When will you start making personal lifestyle changes to help clean up our environment? Our party will abolish the carbon tax, making life more affordable for all Canadians. The fear-mongering climate alarmists will not be allowed to ruin our prosperous nation.
Thank you, Roger. Jeffrey KRAUTER, what would the NDP do in this situation?
Well, you know, Canada actually produces more greenhouse gases per capita than any other G20 country. So what we do, we can talk about China's coal-fired plants all we want, but what we do in Canada matters. And on day one, the NDP, of an NDP government, we would cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline and all fossil fuel subsidies and begin investing in the tremendous natural advantages we've had in wind, solar, and geothermal. We have an incredible opportunity before us to hire, you know, potentially tens of thousands of tradespeople to retrofit every building in Canada by 2030. I've heard that that's impossible, that it's too costly. Well, we don't have an option. We have to try, and it can be a driver for our economy and a massive mobilization to do the right thing.
Thanks, Jeff. PIRIE Mitchell.
Well, John, you've gone and done it again, and it's just so disappointing. Firstly, your party has not put forward a plan for climate change. It hasn't published its plan for this election. We have no idea of what your goals are doing. You haven't published it. You haven't had approval in Ottawa. Secondly, you're wrong about China building 350 new coal plants. Do you want to know how many they're building? Well, I'll tell you how many they're building. Right now they have 15 coal-powered generators. They're building 6. They're under construction, and there are at least 2 on the planning stage. It's a long way from 350. Don't know where you got your stuff from, but it ain't that you need to believe in.
Thank you, PIRIE. And IRMA.
CHP Canada will protect the air, soil, and water from man-made chemical pollutants. However, there is no clear evidence that monies collected through carbon taxes will do anything to reduce climate change or improve the environment. They will absolutely increase the cost to Canadians of all goods and services and put money in the pockets of big corporations. The Green Energy Act in Ontario is the perfect example of our citizens being forced to participate in an Ontario scheme for green energy. In Holland, if you want to participate, you can buy a block of electricity, 100 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, it's up to you. You pay the 35 or 40 cents a kilowatt for that. But that didn't force the poor people in Holland to pay for green energy if they didn't want it or couldn't afford it. Here we are all being forced to pay for the Green Energy Act, and I think that is really harming people.
Okay, thank you, Irma. Our next question from the floor, from Sylvia. About,
is there any chance for rebuttals on that topic?
How are we doing on time? You know what? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so I'll give you, can we set the clock? Let's go for 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes on the clock?
Okay, and I get 30 seconds?
You get
so
30
climate change plans are only climate change plans if they reduce emissions. The Liberals and the Conservatives have never reduced emissions. Since 1992, with the Earth Summit, emissions have gone up, except for a little blip in 2008 because of the recession. The Trans Mountain Pipeline, the oil and gas industry, those are not part of the Conservative or the Liberals' plans. They are trying to pull one over on the population by saying that the climate is important, but not doing anything about it.
Okay, John Nader, and then we'll go to Roger.
Well, I know PIRIE is very excited to hear about our positive Conservative plan for the future in our platform. And I have good news, PIRIE, only one more sleep.
Okay, and Roger?
Having been around the block a few times, I can tell you that back in the 70s, we were all quite fearful because at that time the scientists told us that we were going to enter another ice age. Moving along to the 80s, we were all told that acid rain was going to kill all our crops and we were all going to starve to death. In the 90s, there was the ozone layer that was going to cause a huge problem for all of us. And these are all well-known scientists saying these things. And recently, Al Gore in 2006 made a number of predictions in his video that, well, they just didn't come true. So it's time for people to wake up and understand that we don't have a climate emergency.
PIRIE Mitchell, you want to be quick about this?
Well, Roger, I'm going to tell you, and I'm encouraged by what's happened over the last 30 years. We are not going into an ice age because we fixed the hole in the ozone, right? We fixed it. The world collectively got together and got rid of the stuff that's in those aerosol cans. CFC, thank you. So we did that. Acid rain. We don't have acid rain anymore because the Americans stopped burning coal, and that was causing the acid rain. We can do this in terms of climate change because we already proven that we can do it.
Okay, thank you, PIRIE, and IRMA will give you the last word on this.
Follow the money. What's in the contract? The climate change lobby group is powerful and is creating that mass hysteria. We believe that the sun drives climate change and not CO2. Scientists such as Dr. Tim Ball recently won a court case against large companies wanting to shut down his research. Big companies shut down the small guys, and the small guys need to be listened to.
Okay, good. And I forgot about Jeff. We'll give you, if you can do it quickly, Jeff, we'll give you the last word.
You can't make fighting climate change a priority when you buy and build pipelines. We can't be locked into fossil fuel infrastructure for the next 30 to 50 years and be calling ourselves climate champions.
Okay, thank you all. Now we move on to our next question, and it's open to the floor here about electoral reform. Proportional representation was promised by the incoming government, but has not been implemented. If elected, will you strongly advocate for its implementation, not in the future, but now? Who wants to lead off on this one? Jeff?
Yes, absolutely. It is an absolute priority of the NDP. I've talked to so many people who are disenchanted because of that promise. It was a generational lie. And it was a lie because Justin Trudeau knew the kind of electoral system he wanted was not a proportional system, and yet people were led to believe that he would see the light on proportional representation. The NDP would immediately enact a proportional representation system. We prefer a mixed member proportional, so that this election would really be the last election under first past the post.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Colin?
The Green Party also supports proportional representation. If you really want to see what the parties think about proportional representation, you have to look at how they elect their leaders. All the major parties that have ever been run a government use some form of proportional representation, runoff votes, that kind of thing, in order to make sure that somebody doesn't sneak in that first time and all of a sudden they're leader. I mean, Maxime Bernier was almost the leader of the Conservatives. He led the first vote. Think about that.
Okay, John, you might want to respond to that.
I'm very proud our leader is Andrew Scheer. On the special, I was an associate member of the Special Committee on Electoral Reform. I had the great honor of serving with colleagues from all political parties, with Elizabeth May, with members from the New Democrats, even the Bloc Québécois. Fascinating process. And at the end of the day, believe it or not, there was a consensus on that committee among the Green members, the Bloc, the New Democrats, and the Conservatives. We had a majority report recommending a course of action on electoral reform among a very diverse group of political players. Our one criteria was that we wanted a referendum. We believe that any significant change should be put to the people, and that was our major issue with the process. That was included in the report with consensus. At the 11th hour, actually after the 11th hour, the Liberal Party decided they were no longer in favor of this, and then they kiboshed the entire thing.
Okay. Yep.
We fundamentally believe that any change to the electoral system must be done with the consent of the people.
Okay. Right beside you, PIRIE Mitchell, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this.
You know, I'm really split on this. I understand the reason for it, and I understand that the parties with the smaller number of people getting elected feel that they really feel gypped, and I got that. But the problem that I see is appointing members to the House of Commons by appointment to make up the gap. And the House of Commons has to be elected by the people. We can't have some appointed and some elected. And I personally don't see how we can do this. Now my colleagues will tell, well, hey, look at this, look at that. But I still think that I personally need to review this and really try and understand it, and understand how we can keep a democratic process in it, if we want it.
Yeah, okay. Roger, you want it, and then Irma, and then we'll go over to Colin.
I echo some of the sentiments of PIRIE. I think it's going to create a lot of confusion as to who serves in what riding. And so the People's Party of Canada does not concur with electoral reform.
Okay, Irma?
The Christian Heritage Party absolutely believes in electoral reform. We believe that when people vote in a democracy, their vote should count. You should be able to vote what you think is most in agreement with what your values are. If you're choosing to vote the lesser of two evils, you are actually destroying democracy. We think that Canada should not be subsidizing the parties. Currently, about $31 million goes to each of these other parties to start their next election campaign on a per vote per basis. We should have every party receiving money, including the small parties, or no party should receive money, because we all need to be able to be self-funded.
Okay.
I think that's really important.
Okay. Colin, I'm interested, you were quick to jump in on this.
The problem with first past the post is that with about 30%, 7% of the vote, you can get 100% of the power. And when you have a majority, you can just push through any legislation you'd like. And since we function mostly in majorities, the policy tends to be very polarized. And then 8 years later, we get tired of that flavor and pick the other color. And then they spend the first couple of years undoing the last party's policies. And then they do their own omnibus bills and then pass them using their majority. So with a minority government or proportional representation, specifically for PIRIE, it doesn't mean people on a list. You can still have candidates. Proportional representation doesn't mean you won't know your candidate and the party picks them. But when you have proportional representation, the policy tends to be very centrist, because you walk into that negotiation with consensus. You know you're going to have to get consensus. So you can't just do what you want and put it through your own parliament.
Okay. PIRIE, is it broken, or can it be fixed, or is it fine the way it is right now?
I think it can be fixed, and I'm not adverse to doing this, providing we protect the integrity of a democratic process. And if we start appointing people, if the Conservatives get into third place, which we hope will happen next week, and we go to them, then they start appointing. We're allowed to appoint 5 people, and they get to appoint 5 people to the House of Commons. I don't think that's not democratic. Now, if somebody can show me a system, and Colin seems to think he can, that would look that way, I wouldn't be adverse to looking at it and even supporting it if it supported the democratic process that you did not appoint people to the House of Commons. God knows we've got enough problems in the Senate.
Okay. And Jeff, you wanted to jump in on this.
Well, you know, the Justin Trudeau and the Liberals really live up to the name of Mr. Delay on this, because, you know, the Liberals were once in favor of proportional representation way back in 1921. They've been studying it for the last 88 years. So, you know, when they pretend to act befuddled, like it's so complex that the electorate couldn't possibly understand it, there are, you know, we prefer mixed member. There are alternative member systems where you can see the names on the ballot of everyone who would enter into Parliament. You can order the names in any form you want. There's many systems. We should not be, you know, overawed by proportional representation. We should do it now.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. John Nader.
One of the things I wanted to highlight was democracy within the House of Commons itself. We are in sorely desperate need of reform within the House of Commons itself. One of my colleagues, Michael Chong, in the previous Parliament introduced what he called the Reform Act, which was an important step forward to democratize some of our party functions. Unfortunately, most of the parties followed that law. One party didn't. And so when the Prime Minister decided to unilaterally throw out Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott for the sole crime of standing up for the rule of law, he was actually breaking the Reform Act.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment before we move on? Colin?
Yeah. Speaking of internal politics in the House, the Green Party isn't a whipped party. So that means that if I was your representative and I disagreed with some of the Green Party policy, I wouldn't have to follow the vote. The reasons why people get kicked out of caucus frequently in the PCs or the Liberals is they disagree, do not follow the whipped vote on major issues, and then they get kicked out. So there's not a lot of dissent, and these policies are basically pushed from the top down. There's a lot of backroom staff and corporate influence that guide policy, which means that the policy isn't necessarily for the people, by the people. It's, like I said, top-down rule.
Okay, good stuff. We will move on to our next question. We'll open it up for debate amongst you all, so if you want to jump in on this one, because this is about housing needs. CMHC has developed a goal to eliminate housing needs and to ensure that by 2030, everyone in this country has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. That'd be tough to do in Stratford right now. How will your party address Canada's housing needs? Who wants to open it up on this one? Roger.
We will reduce corporate income taxes from 15% to 10% for companies that provide housing. This will assist those companies with their ability to finance new housing starts and general company planning to build more homes faster. We will assert our Canadian sovereignty on the immigration portfolio. Right now, our border is basically wide open for anyone to come and live in Canada. Last year, 350,000 immigrants crossed our borders. This has put an amazing level of stress on our housing supply. It is not sustainable. The other parties all want to continue this high pace of immigration. In 3 years, we will have added the population of Nova Scotia to our country. Our research indicates that while we welcome immigrants of every kind, and in fact need immigrants, only between 100,000 and 150,000 per year is sustainable for us as a nation.
Okay, John, you wanted to follow up on this one?
I want to address the issue of immigration. Canada needs new Canadians. We need people to come to Canada to make their lives in Canada. I find it troubling when I hear parties talking about slashing immigration numbers because we are a welcoming country. We are a country that needs immigration to maintain our population base, and we look locally. We look at the hardworking people who've come to this area, who work hard, who contribute to society, who come here perhaps temporarily in the first place. They should have a path to citizenship. If they come here, if they want to work hard, if they want to build their homes here in Canada and contribute to society, we should be welcoming them here.
Okay, we'll come through.
But then back on the issue of housing. Whenever we're looking at the government programs to support housing needs, here in Perth County, Perth-Wellington, we want to talk about both affordable housing but attainable housing as well. Government programs need to look at things with a rural lens. What works in Toronto, what works in Mississauga doesn't work in Perth-Wellington. We need to be able to have units that are smaller numbers and are more viable for towns and cities like Stratford and smaller communities.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in just a moment. I want to let Jeff say something first about it.
So the problem with the problem is that people can't afford to wait for the solution to the housing crisis. We need to start building affordable housing now. We have a pitifully low portion of our overall housing stock as social and below market housing. The NDP would build 500,000 new units within the 2030 time frame. And it's about supporting co-ops and community enterprises to get those projects moving. I saw the face of housing precarity when I was campaigning right here in Stratford. There was 4 generations of one family, 3 women and a young son. And the eldest said, you know, I'd like to live out my life in my own house. And, you know, the NDP is going to make that happen for all Canadians.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And with that in mind, too, what is affordable? And let's talk about affordable housing with IRMA.
Okay, we support building grandpa suites so that people can afford to live in a smaller unit if that's what they need. We also realize that there are many, many buildings that are unused or underused that could be retrofitted, but the problem is the red tape that it takes. It takes months or years, actually, to get some of these projects through, and we want to cut the red tape. There's a huge cost also with broken families. And when broken families break up, there's 2 houses required. And I think it would, if we can help people stay together, that would help our housing crisis also. Being homeless is not the same as houseless, and we also need to look after the homeless.
Okay, Roger, and then we'll go to PIRIE.
With the high cost of housing in general in Canada, one of the things that we would need to take a serious look at is the construction of tiny homes. Tiny homes that a young couple could start off their married life in, for example, or a tiny home that elderly couples may want to retire in. And I'm talking about well-insulated, permanent tiny homes on individual lots, so it's a substantial investment. They're becoming very popular throughout the world, so we really need to explore that avenue to help.
Okay, PIRIE?
It's a critical issue because it's a combination of what it costs actually to build a house and the capital gain that people have when they sell it. Right now, the demand is high, the inventory is low, people are coming here and they're getting more money for their house because, more than what it's worth in terms of the building, because the demand is there. I don't want to take that away from folks, but I think we need to recognize it has a significant influence on housing. If the Liberals are elected, we will introduce a first-time home buyers house program. That allows us, the Government of Canada, to advance 10% of the value of the house to the new buyer, and they will then pay it back to the Government of Canada down the road. So that is that. And the other thing we need to do is we need to go after the speculators that are offshore, and the Liberals have promised to do that.
Okay. With that in mind, too, is it not the trickle-down effect? We look at the market value, but then we look at people retiring from Toronto. They come to Stratford with cash in hand, and it's driving prices right through the roof. Colin?
Yeah, the highest markets in Canada do push up the rates for smaller markets like ours. What we need to look at is below market and non-profit housing. The Green Party wants to invest in more co-ops, non-profit, so that people who are having a hard time finding housing, they're not the people coming out of Toronto looking for a nice house here to retire in. They're single-parent families, Indigenous people, and seniors who are struggling. And so we want to build housing that's available to them and keep it out of the market. So these are, not stuff for sale. So we would use tax incentives for purpose-built rental properties, as well as nonprofit co-ops. And I think that would be effective for the people who aren't necessarily interested in buying a house. The CMHC is tasked with backstopping mortgages, basically. And we want to retask them to actually solve the housing crisis.
Okay. With that in mind, how do we know what's affordable? Because once it becomes affordable, everybody wants to get in it, then that starts driving the prices up as well, too. Jeff, did you want to respond?
So, I mean, I've heard in many communities, even up in the Wellington part of the riding in Mount Forest and Arthur, that people are concerned about creeping housing prices. In terms of the day-to-day cost of living and day-to-day affordability, we know that people need help now, and that's why we're proposing an immediate rental subsidy, so that no one is spending more than a third of their income on rent. I mean, anything above that does not meet any standard of affordable. We want to make it so that Canadians are earning the wages and have the income to have affordable housing as well.
Okay. Everybody in on this one? Colin?
I just wanted to talk about one more thing. With homelessness, there's been cities that have actually had the most success with fighting homelessness usually have a housing first strategy. If you can take someone off the street and put them somewhere where they're safe, warm, and can have access to, somewhere to be, to wash and have food, magically they do better. They're actually, they can then get back to what they need, and so that strategy is quite helpful. So we want to make housing a human right. It's part of the Green Party platform, and that will help homelessness as well as people who are kind of priced out of the market.
Yeah, okay. And we know this area is, I believe the last stats I saw was the 4th most desirable place to reside and to retire. So of course we're seeing people with lots of money coming from the larger centers and driving the prices up. Thanks for your response on that one. We had another question from the floor. The commissioners of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls called on all political leaders to implement the calls for justice and to develop and implement a national action plan to address violence against Indigenous women, girls, LGBTQ, and Two-Spirit people. What is your party, how is your party planning to respond to this? Who'd like to lead off on this one? Irma?
We certainly want to have that inquiry because it's a shame and it's a crime that so many women have been murdered because it was possible to do so. We think the Indian Act is flawed. It's outdated. It needs to be replaced. The Indian Act, people need to be able to own their own property. We need to have transparency on the reserves. They need to open their books. The Onion Lake Reserve has consistently refused to give up their books and show how the chiefs are spending money on themselves and leaving the people in poverty. With an example of a good Indian band is the Shelt Indian Band in BC. In there, they're running their band and their reserve like a municipality. They have people picking up the garbage and they pay taxes to the municipality. They've been doing that for 30 years, and that is a very profitable Indian band.
Okay, thanks, Irma. Anybody else? John?
So first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of work left to be done. There's a long journey along the road to reconciliation that has to be done, and it's not going to be something that happens overnight. It's going to be something that's going to take a long-term look at and a long-term solution as well. Before I address the question of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, I want to talk very briefly about drinking water on reserves. In 2019, there's no reason why any Canadian should not have access to clean drinking water. And I want to pay credit to someone, and that's Dr. Jane Philpott. When she was Minister of Indigenous Services, she made a significant effort at reducing drinking water advisories on reserves. I say this as a Conservative, but I think she was one of the most effective ministers in that portfolio ever. She truly cared about that portfolio, and I think her removal from that position and her removal from that is a crying shame, because she really cared about that portfolio. On the National Action Plan, absolutely, we need to have a plan to address missing, murdered Indigenous women. We need real action. We need to give support to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We also need to make sure they have the resources for law enforcement, for the protection of women along certain stretches of area, particularly in the West, to ensure that they are safe and that real action happens.
Thank you. We'll jump over to Roger and Jeff. We'll get to you right after that.
We absolutely see the value of moving forward with the inquiry, but as I often say, leadership comes from the top, and we wonder how we get into these situations. But when we take a look at our current Prime Minister and how he has treated two of his senior female cabinet ministers over the last few months, it's no wonder that this sort of thing goes on in this country. So we need to enact real change amongst Canadians, and the People's Party of Canada intends to do that. We've consulted with Indigenous nations, and one of the issues that they're telling us is that bureaucrats in Ottawa are the ones telling them how to fix problems on their reserves, such as drinking water and etc. Those people believe that they have the solutions. They just don't have the money. But the bureaucrats come along and say, no, this is how we're going to do it. Well, that's the wrong approach, and so we need to change that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
So, real reconciliation, it is going to be a journey, and it's going to be a journey of listening. And, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's appalled to hear that our government was going to continue to take Indigenous children and their families to court to prevent them from accessing the health care that they needed in a timely fashion. And Mr. Scheer, I'm surprised to hear that John remembered his name tonight. It's the first time I've heard it on this campaign. Has not committed to dropping the government's appeal of that ruling. You know, if the Conservatives were so offended by boil water advisories, you know, John could have whispered in Gary's ear. He could have whispered to John Duncan when Amnesty International was attacking the Harper government on the appalling spread of boil water advisories to get some infrastructure onto Indigenous reserves with public funding immediately and honor the treaties.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Perry, did you want to respond to that?
I think that for too long in our history, we have been patronizing to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I think that the solution to this really difficult problem is collective wisdom and collective energy. That we need to sit down with them and work out a solution for the present and for tomorrow. It is not good enough for us to depend on the Indian Act. What a terrible name, eh? The Indian Act. To say, well, we're going to take care of the problem that way. In this particular case, it's going to take collective wisdom and energy to solve it.
Okay, thank you. Colin?
The Green Party endorses all the recommendations from the inquiry, and we want to see them instituted to help keep people safe. We want to work with the Indigenous populations and the Inuit and the Métis populations to revamp the so-called Indian Act. And as has been mentioned, this is going to be a long process, and it's going to be a journey because we have to work with those populations with their individual needs in order to support them as we're responsible to do as a nation. The Liberal government inherited approximately 100 boil water advisories when they took over from the Harper government. And they have done some work, but there's still 90 left. The estimated cost to fix it is $3.2 billion. That's a lot less than the Trans Mountain Pipeline cost.
Interesting. Okay, Irma, you wanted to say a couple of things.
In 1968, there was a white paper written by the Liberal Party. It was an excellent report. It's still on the shelf. The difference between us and the Indians and the natives is something called allodial title versus fee simple absolute. We own our properties and it's ours, but the reservations are held in trust by our government, and they don't have the pride of ownership, and that's what we need to give back to them.
Thank you, Irma. Anybody else on this before we go on to our next question? We've got, Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to address the original question, which was about missing and murdered Indigenous women. The NDP believes that we not only need to end colonialism and industrial racism, but address gender violence through a whole government lens, from the workplace to partner violence, and make sure that Canada is a leader in protecting our women and girls.
Thank you, Jeff. It's 8:30. We've got time for a few more questions because we'll do closing comments in about 10 minutes from now. From Lynette, the question is about guaranteed annual basic income. Guaranteed annual basic income. Before the provincial election, all parties supported the idea, though they disagreed on the process. What are the federal parties planning to do about it? Who'd like to open it up on this one? Colin?
I would, because we have that program in our platform. The guaranteed livable income, as we're calling it, is basically a backstop for the entire country. It would replace a patchwork of federal and provincial assistance programs such as Ontario Works and Disability to basically provide people with a livable amount of money. So this is not just a pittance that you're going to scrape by on cat food and craft dinner. This is an amount of money that you could have a healthy, reasonable life. And it sounds expensive, but there's savings in other areas. When you think about the administration of all those programs is one thing, but poverty is the number one cost, well, is the number one thing that can worsen your health. And I really don't think health should be a luxury. I think everyone should be afforded that. It's part of the Canada Health Act that it has to be accessible. So I think a guaranteed livable income, which the pilot was canceled by Mr. Ford here in Ontario, is a worthwhile endeavor for our country. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Terry Mitchell, you had your microphone up. We'll go to Perry, and then we'll go to Jeff. Terry?
I'm not aware of the Liberals supporting guaranteed annual income, but I could be corrected. I'm just not aware of it if it's true. But what I am aware of is that the Liberal Party went out of its way in the last 4 years to bring people who were below the poverty line up into above the poverty line, 900,000 across the country. And what that meant is that, and they did that through taxation. And what it means is that folks who couldn't afford food and clothing and things for their children can now do it. And that was what the Liberals did, and that's what the Liberals plan to continue to do into the next session that we're in. But as far as a guaranteed annual income, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Jeff KRAUTER, what would the NDP's platform be?
Well, a couple of things. First, when the Liberals tout their numbers about the number of people they've lifted out of poverty, it's not to gainsay the progress that has been made, but they've fiddled with the poverty line and the poverty statistics, and they're using a measure that doesn't include costs like housing and the costs of medication. There are people in precarious housing who, according to the Liberals, have been lifted out of poverty. We need to do more. And what the NDP intends to do is to continue the pilot project that was cancelled in Ontario, and in fact expand it into a full national pilot project. And it addresses what Colin is talking about. Colin presented the conservative approach to guaranteed livable income. We're not proposing guaranteed income as a cure-all for our social programs. We want to enhance everyone's quality of life while making sure that everyone receives the specialized care that they need without turning to the marketplace.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Irma, you had your mic up.
I'm not sure what my party would do to help you right now with a guaranteed annual income, but I will tell you about our plan for the future. We believe strongly in individual responsibility and accountability, but also equally in compassion. We would replace all retirement, health, and employment benefits with a personal income security account. This is actually a made-in-Canada plan. Starting with your first job, you're just like current source deductions, 10% of your income will be deposited, 5% from you and 5% from your employer. Up to 15% annually can be drawn upon when ill or unemployed. When Chile adopted this made-in-Canada plan 30 years ago, workers could choose either the current tax-funded pension plan or move to this investment plan. Those who choose the PISA account are rich today.
Thanks, Irma. John Nader?
So currently, it's not part of our platform. It's not something we're proposing at this time. But I do have to say, my former colleague, Conservative colleague, Senator Hugh Segal, has long been a proponent of this type of program, and he's done a significant amount of research on it, and has had many articles in the Globe and Mail, for example, on this program. So it is something worth exploring. But one point I wanted to raise is about the Opportunity Act. It's an act that was introduced in the previous Parliament by one of my colleagues, and it was a program that would have ensured that no one was worse off when they worked. So whether someone was on an Ontario Disability Support Program or whether they were on some form of social assistance, too often when you start working, even just a couple hours, you are worse off than if you'd never worked in the first place. So encouraging working with all 10 provinces, 3 territories, to ensure that no person is worse off when they work. I talk to so many people who want to work 3 or 4 hours a week. That's about the limit that they may be able to, 10 or 12 hours because of a disability or because of some personal situation. But they're in a tough position to do so because they would actually be worse off by so doing, whether it's losing actual financial support or losing some of the benefits such as drug coverage.
Thanks, John. And I want to get to Roger here too.
The People's Party of Canada will not initiate a guaranteed income program. We will, however, not decrease any social programs that are currently on the table. But what we are going to definitely do is we're going to leave more money in your pocket, and we're going to do that by abolishing supply management, which means you're going to be able to have access to less expensive dairy, eggs, and poultry products, good local nutritious food that you'll be able to purchase more easily. And we're also going to abolish the carbon tax, and that's going to save every single Canadian a lot of money because that tax was going to drive the price of every single good and service up in this country.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I know you wanted to say something.
I just had a policy piece for John. So the Green Party Guaranteed Livable Income does not penalize work. So it's not that, oh, I got a part-time job. Oh, you're cut off. No, you can work, and if you come above the threshold and you're, then happily employed, you will be out of the program, but it's not like a cutoff, oh, you work 2 hours, you're done. So it doesn't function like that.
Okay. John, did you want to reply to that at all?
No, I absolutely appreciate it. And I think that's something Senator Segal has written on before. There has to be an incentive to get to a point where you're no longer requiring the assistance. And I do appreciate that. And I know Elizabeth May has spoken on this extensively, and I have a great deal of respect for Ms. May.
Thank you for that response. And we're fighting time here, so we're getting close to that time. Why don't we, we'll do our closing remarks, and we'll start with Colin. If you wouldn't mind giving us, we'll give you 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I think it's been an informative night. We are at a tipping point. We're at a point in history where we have the knowledge, we have the means to make change, and we're not doing it. And history is not going to be kind to the members of government who do not act. And we need to act because the longer we wait on climate change, the harder it is to solve. We've been waiting for over 30 years, and we're at the point where it's getting more and more difficult to solve. We're actually getting to the point where there's going to be an acceleration phase, where as the planet warms, areas like the Arctic are going to thaw and release methane out of the permafrost. We're there. We're at the point where Iceland and Greenland the glaciers are melting. We're already there. What we need is a strong voice in Ottawa to say that climate change is real and we actually have to do something about it, not just talk about it. There's been a lot of questions about social issues tonight. All these social issues are only going to get worse as climate change accelerates. All of a sudden, as resources become more scarce, there's going to be more conflict. We need to fix this now, because the more energy and effort we put into it now, the easier it's going to be. One important thing I like to end with is we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And we need to take care of it, and we need to start setting things in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. John Nader, your closing comments. You've got 2 minutes.
Well, good evening, and thank you once again to the Stratford District Chamber of Commerce for hosting tonight's debate. These events are so important so that you can hear where we stand on the issues that matter to so many of you. If I'm given the honor and the privilege of serving once again as your Member of Parliament, my commitment to you remains the same. My first priority is not to a political party, it's not to a government. My priority and my commitment is to you, the people of Perth-Wellington. If I'm elected to serve you, to be your voice, to represent you in Ottawa, to fight on behalf of the issues that matter to you. And that goes whether I serve in opposition or serve as part of an Andrew Scheer government. It would be my honor to represent and serve you to the best of my ability. 4 years ago, I made the commitment to you that I would work hard and that I would be accessible. And I hope I've achieved that. Over the past 4 years, I've had meetings with over 600 stakeholders, municipal representatives, and individuals across Perth-Wellington. I'm proud to have attended more than 700 community events in Perth and Wellington counties, including firemen's breakfasts. But all events, because it's important to be accessible. And it's not only being there, it's listening and taking those views and taking them to Ottawa and raising those issues, whether it's on the floor of the House of Commons, in committee, or with my colleagues. It's about crossing the floor and working with members of both sides of the aisle, raising the issues of the individual ministers about concerns, advocating for infrastructure projects for municipalities, and fighting on behalf of families, small businesses, and individuals who want to get ahead. On October 21st, you'll have a choice to make. Who do you want to be your voice in Ottawa? Who do you trust to be there for you when you need them the most? My name is John Nader, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, John. Perry Mitchell, you have 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
I shudder at Prime Minister Scheer. I shudder at that. Just take a look at Toronto right now with the chap they got in charge there and transfer that to Ottawa. This election is a vitally important election for all of us. This election's most of the time in the past, there was no difference between really the progressive conservatives and the liberals. And they sort of went back and forth in the 40s and 50s and ran the country. Actually, you used to sit down and have coffee together and they'd work together, and which is something we don't have now. There's a saying that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And when it comes to climate change and the desperate problems our grandchildren's grandchildren will face, we can only bank on the Conservative Party to do a few things after their platform is published tomorrow. We can have a look. Recently, the 4 parties were given a grade by Dr. Hayhu and Andrew Leach, Dr. Andrew Leach, an economist and a scientist, one at the University of Texas and the other one in the University of Alberta. The Conservatives got grade D for ambition on climate change and F in feasibility. The NDP earned an A in ambition and a D in feasibility. The Green Party got an A in ambition and a C in feasibility. The Liberal Party got a B in ambition and an A in feasibility. We've started, we're working on it, and we're doing it. Please don't interrupt that and elect somebody who will represent you in the ruling party. Because with us, with you, and with the party in Ottawa, we'll be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Jeff KRAUTER from the New Democratic Party. You've got 2 minutes.
I've visited many people across in all parts of the riding, but I've heard from far too many people that they just won't vote this time. Trust in our political leaders is low because of broken promises and really an utter lack of solutions for working people. And now that the scale of the climate crisis is known and clear to most of us, people despair that anything can be done. Let me remind you what Jack Layton consistently told us: never let them tell you it can't be done. A vote for the NDP is a vote for different choices, It's a vote for a Green New Deal that will meet our climate targets. It's a vote for a family doctor when you need one, pharmacare, and health care from head to toe. It's a vote for affordable, accessible transit for all, and it's a vote for proportional representation, so that when you vote, you can vote for what you actually want and not for the person you despise the least. We can make these commitments to you because we don't rely on the millionaires and billionaires. We're not going to appease the lobbyists and the wealthy corporations. We have a costed environmental plan that's going to make the transition to renewable energy without leaving anyone behind. Canada needs a government of the left, and that can only be, of all the parties on this stage, can only be the NDP. When Mr. Ford came in Ontario and people were facing a tired Liberal government, who did they turn to? Who did they trust to beat back austerity? The NDP. Jagmeet Singh is running to be our Prime Minister. He's gaining momentum. Please vote for something that you believe in. Vote for what you actually want. You don't have to settle for bad or worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Roger FUHR, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. You know, I was up here on this stage 4 years ago running as an independent candidate in this riding. It seems I'm having a déjà vu moment. I heard most of these issues back then, and they still have not been addressed. At the time, people were blaming Conservatives after being in power for 9 years. Now we have had 4 years of Liberals, and guess what? Has someone dropped the ball? I'd be willing to bet that when the next election rolls around, I will be having flashbacks yet again. Every election is about what you want as a Canadian. Who you vote for should mostly reflect your values and morals. When people exercise strategic voting practices or default votes, democracy fails because the government is elected on false premises that do not reflect the will of the people. I am asking you to focus on understanding the platforms that are before you and actually do politics differently by casting your ballot for the candidate whose party mostly reflects your personal values and morals. Then we will have a government that better reflects Canadian values. But you must perform due diligence to accomplish this. Take the time to do the work of investigating. Please. Future generations are counting on you. It's time to do politics differently. We want to let the people know that they matter by using their vote. Do we want the same old, or are we ready to put Canadians first? Lastly, vote and tell everyone you know to cast their ballot. Canada is counting on you.
Thank you, Roger. And finally this evening, IRMA DEVRIES. You have 2 minutes.
Life is the first basic human right. Without it, all other rights are meaningless. Strong families are the basic building block of society and promote national prosperity and safe communities. CHP supports freedom of speech and conscience, freedom to worship or not, freedom to contract, to build and own property. All are God-given rights. Will government protect those rights when they won't give human rights to the most vulnerable, not yet pre-born human beings? Our party leader, Rod Taylor, got an A from LifeSite News. Canada was founded on the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Canada contracted to have God as the foundation of our laws and governance. All our laws are to be based on common law and not be repugnant to biblical law. CHP Canada demands balanced budgets. That's our contract with you. A contract consists of an offer, full disclosure, a meeting of the minds or agreement, and then fulfillment. You are offered many perks and handouts in return for your vote. Would you contract without knowing the full cost of your indebtedness? My contract offer will cost you less, exposes the regressive nature of so-called progressive policies of current and past governments, and we offer hope for a better future. Life, family, and freedom. You are buying the contract either by your vote or by tacit agreement. Speak up and vote your conscience. On October 21st, vote CHP, vote IRMA DEVRIES.
Thanks, Irma. Can we give a round of applause for all of our candidates here, please? Thank you all for being here tonight. It's good to see a great crowd here. Thanks to our volunteers from the Chamber for their assistance. Thanks to OR Insurance, Vancia Financial, and the Huron-Perth Real Estate Association for their support tonight. Hopefully you found this informative. You can make up your mind on October the 21st. Think about what you've heard here tonight. You may want to discuss it over Thanksgiving turkey, but you may want to keep the peace as well. Wightman TV will be replaying this a few times over the next, before the election itself. I want to thank the candidates for participating as we get closer to the finish line. Let's face it, folks, this has been a bit of a marathon for all of the candidates. They've put in an awful lot of miles, some long days. Perth-Wellington is a huge riding, and they've done an admirable job representing their respective parties. They're going to be sticking around for a little bit if you'd like to ask them any questions. Thanks for being here. Happy Thanksgiving this weekend. Thank you for your time tonight. Thanks, Tom.